Record. Awesome, ladies and gentlemen. I am glad that you are here tonight. Tonight, we're going to go over how to handle a difficult audience. I want to remind everybody that you're not in this alone. This is Toastmasters. It's all about the relationships. And this on the screen is my contact information. I personally prefer that you use my phone. I don't always get the chance to see my email on a daily basis. It could be if you send it to my email, it could be 4 or 5 days before I ever see it. So please use my phone. It gets a faster response. For tonight, I have several objectives I want to cover. They're going to be quick and easy. So let's go see what we have to do to get this thing started. The objectives. These are the different objectives I plan on covering tonight. I want you to be aware of the different types of difficult audience individuals, right? The type of people that are going to be there, how to diffuse the situation, your ability to recover, and how this applies to life outside. Now, when you're doing these kind of things, you want to respond when talking to an audience, and you want a certain response. You want them to either laugh or cry. You want them to interact with you somehow. Whatever it is, your message needs to be received. And oftentimes you are faced with distractors. There are those people in the audience who will disrupt your speech somehow. They have different behaviors. They'll ruin the enjoyment of your speech and the gift that you're giving to that whole audience. They're out there to try to ruin that. Difficult audience members are abound, and our rules of contact never change. Our rules of conduct, sorry, never change, regardless of what type of disruptor you are dealing with. Now, rule number one: always, always, always remain professional. Your professional behavior encompasses many different qualities: integrity, respectfulness, maintaining a calm demeanor. No matter what the circumstance is, no matter what the interruption is, there are effective ways of neutralizing tension and returning the attention that you want to the performance you're giving. It is always better to avoid engaging in a negative way with anyone in your audience. You need to recognize the conduct and you need to deal with it accordingly. As such, we're going to go over those different types of people and that type of conduct. There are all sorts of different people. You have the talker, that one person. That talker comments way too often, talks for too long, dominates the discussion. You sit there and you ask something and he'll just go on and on and on and on. That kind of person, you need to stop, just like the rest of these. You also have the interrupter. Now, the interrupter may believe that she or he has something to contribute. And this participant wants to agree, disagree, or make some other point other than what you're doing. Interrupters are impatient for information. They ask questions. They ask questions about topics that will be discussed later on in your presentation. They ask questions that will not have anything to do with your presentation at all. Overall, interrupters are just looking for attention. Then you have that chatterer. We all see this going on. You've been in meetings before, you've been in corporate meetings, you're in meetings with other people, and you have that chatterer, that person who engages other individuals in the room in conversations. They might comment on something being discussed or talk about some unrelated subject. Usually you'll see they're sitting there going, they'll lean over towards your neighbor and start talking. And then you have the arguer. Now, the arguer is a person who is, I don't want to say vindictive. What's a good word here? An arguer is one who thinks they are right and they know better than you. So the arguer might consider themselves to be that expert person, to be to be someone with incorrect information, but enjoys giving that information and enjoys correcting others, regardless of whether they're right or wrong. He or she may also have difficulty stating suggestions in a constructive manner, and they will always be in an angry fit of some sort if confronted and disagreed with. So you would have to diffuse the arguer with some good techniques to put them down and let them calm down at the same time. And the complete opposite spectrum of the arguer is the silent type. So that where the arguer would stand up there and boast and yick, you have that silent type who would just sit down and do nothing, participate nothing. So if you're having a group conversation and you're asking people questions and this person just sits there, maybe their head is down so as not to try to be noticed, they want to try to be invisible. In order to get that person to participate, you would actually have to call on that person and interact with that person in order to get them to do something. And then, of course, you have that God fearing electronic device enthusiast, always on that phone, always clicking number, clicking, you're texting while you're talking. In some circumstances, audience members may be invited to post something on social media, respond to questions using their devices, or access electronic content. However, that electronic device enthusiast is doing it forever. Even after it's done, you can see them still texting while you're giving your speech. They're texting someone else in the other room or something. What you should be doing is you should state the expectations at the beginning of the speech on what you expect from electronic devices. Similar to like when we have the sergeant at arms comes in, they say, turn off the electronic devices or put it in a silent mode and put them aside so it doesn't disrupt the speaker. Same type of thing. If you're going to have electronic devices used during your speech, you need to set those expectations ahead of time. And then if they don't follow those expectations, you have to address those. So now we went through all these different types of people and all these things that they could be doing. So let's start thinking about how do we take that situation and we diffuse it. We calm it down, we fix it so that you can return and get on to what you were discussing. So let's first talk we'll take each one at a time. We'll first deal with the talker. That person who gets up there and blah 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 blah, blah, right? All right. So recognize that the talker actually has a contribution. Okay? Even if they interrupt you, even if they stop you and make a comment on it or something, they have a contribution. And then you say thank you for that contribution, and you assert that others may have others may have a need to speak, and ask them to sit down, because you don't want this person dominating the entire meeting. If they get up there and they start talking and talking and talking and talking and talking, you need to thank you so much for your comments, thank you for your contribution, and then ask someone else to speak so that person will sit down. You can always target questions to other participants by name so that you can skip over the talker if you know that that talker is going to keep on going on and on. You can also avoid eye contact with the talker. So instead of looking at the talker, you look at other people. That way the talker realizes he does not have your attention. When the talker pauses, if they're talking and they keep on talking, as soon as they pause, you can immediately thank them for their contribution and you can call on another participant to comment. So the whole point with the talker is when they get going and you see an opening, you need to break into that opening and sidetrack that talker to make that talker sit down and either move on with your talk, your speech, or ask someone else to become participate. That's how you deal with the talker. Now that interrupter, man, early in the session, you tell the participants to note all their comments and questions. And you want them to to have their answers later on because you're going to address them at the end of the session. This is probably one of the best techniques you can use for any of these interrupters, because if you say that at the beginning, as soon as someone interrupts with a question, you can tell them, write that down and we're going to answer it at the end. And that will calm that situation down, right? You do want to keep the participants engaged, and you want to ask them to complete an interactive learning activity. So when we're doing different things, we sometimes we go into breakout rooms and people interact with each other, or you create an interactive activity here in the main room, and you get the people to interact between you and the other members of the audience in order to achieve something. If the interrupter is out there, you can always write an outline on a flip chart and a whiteboard showing the order of the topics that you'll cover. That way the interrupter will see that information and know enough not to stop you, or, oh, what about this? Oh, what about that? It's right there on the flip chart. You just point to it and ask them to sit down. We'll get to that later. Just go ahead, take your seat. Right. Checking each one off on that board as you go through would also help the audience as well as the interrupter to know where you are in the meeting. If you wanted to, you could actually ask the interrupter to complete a specific task, such as recording other participants' responses from a brainstorming activity or something like that. And you can have that person who usually interrupts, you can have that person write on the flip chart and taking notes. So if that interrupter is engaged doing something, then they're not likely to be interrupting your speech, but they will be writing down information from the different participants and thus not interrupting you. You have that chatterer, that busybody, that one that's always talking, leaning over, blah, 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 blah. You should ask that chatterer. Now, I really like dealing with the chatterer because they have something they want to say. So ask them to say it. Ask them to share their topic of conversation with the entire group. Now, if you remember in school, when you were going through school and the teacher was up there talking, and all of a sudden the teacher says, "Hey, John, why don't you stand up and tell everyone what you're talking about?" Because John was the chatterer in that room, in that classroom, and he was sitting there talking to Mary. And of course, John will say, "No, no, never mind. I don't want to," right? Because it was something that was private between him and her. Well, the same thing happens here, right? The situation is exactly the same, except that you're dealing with adults instead of kids. Right? You could also do the same thing that the teacher did. You can stop talking and you can look directly at that chatterer, just like the teacher did in classroom. And then when that chatterer stops talking, just like the student in the classroom stops talking, then the teacher carries on, then you can carry on. It's the same exact thing. Restate the point that was being discussed, and then you can always ask the chatterer for their opinion and have them drawn into your conversation rather than their own conversation. So I'm sure you recognize how some of these things happened while you were growing up and how you saw them going on in school. So this is basically the same theory. These problems are not new. They've always existed for a long, long, long time. It's how we deal with them that makes it different. Now, of course, you have me. Right? You get up there and you argue. I know I'm right. My parents used to tell me I should be a lawyer because even though I knew I was wrong, I could prove I was right. And I would argue my point. Yes. So the arguer may or may not have valid points. So you should acknowledge the arguer. You should thank them for their contribution, regardless of what it is. You could always find merit in one of those arguers' comments. Give them credit, express your agreement, and move on. The point is, you want to move on. You don't want to belabor the argument. You just want to say, thank you. I recognize this. I agree with you. Next. And next will be what you do. You can always paraphrase the arguer's comments in objective terms so that it fits into your speech and then move on. Again, it's always about the moving on process here. You can ask the arguer to explain the reason for the comment or ask someone else for a comment on the arguer's point and then move on. Always want to be moving forward. You don't want to belabor the argument. You don't want to get into a negative interaction with the arguer. Right? Then, of course, you have that all silent type. I know there are plenty of people in Toastmasters that are like this. Oh my God, forbid that they do anything. We're in Toastmasters. We should all be talking. Yeah, sure. You ask table topics and everyone, they all try to hide their face. Don't call me. Don't call me. The silent type. You know what? Ask them a question. Ask them a question you're confident they know the answer to. You don't put them on the spot. If they are there and they're the silent type, they're silent for a reason. They have some sort of fear inside them that keeps them from participating. So you ask them questions or leading questions on something that you know they have the answer to. That way they can participate. You can ask the question of the group. You can suggest that all participants take a turn sharing their opinions. So eventually you'll get around to that silent person. We see this all the time when we do things like round robin evaluations or round robin questions in table topics, things of that nature, where each person gets a chance to do something. You should always respond with positive enthusiasm whenever the silent type contributes, because that silent type has some fear and you want to be able to push some self-confidence into them. So you always respond with a positive, enthusiastic answer or response of thank youing and something for them to make them feel good about what they've done, their contribution. And then the last one, that electronic device guy, that person that's always pushing that button. When I say these things, I see these things go on, I want to take that 2x4 and right over their head. Eh, but we can't do that. We can't do that. We have to be reasonable. We have to be smart. So this enthusiast, if you set clear expectations at the beginning of the presentation on how to deal with the electronic devices when you want them to use them, you should be okay. What you're doing is you're taking comfort. You're taking comfort and at a certain level of your speech and the content in your speech, and you're holding account everyone there in order to do the things that they're supposed to be doing on the electronic devices at the correct time. So you can sit there and tell them in advance, when I get to this point, I'm going to ask you to take out your device. I'm going to ask you to vote on this subject. I'm going to ask you to text so and so something. And then you give direction, right? You direct the audience and the members in the audience to use the electronic devices, whether it's a polling on streamed media responses, whether it's a polling on our Zoom meeting where you got the poll data, you start the poll, doesn't matter. You're telling them when to use the device, when to stop using the device, and then they should put away. That way they won't be sitting there always tuck 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 tuck. You see those thumbs going, that disappears, right? If you prefer, if you prefer audience members to engage without using any type of electronic devices, enlist them into the activity that requires their full concentration. Get some sort of activity going where they have to concentrate on doing that particular activity without the device. For instance, when I gave the speech about how to write a speech in 5 minutes, right? And you all had that piece of paper, right? You were engaged by writing down certain things and filling out the blanks and all those different points, right? So you were physically engaged in an activity to accomplish a specific goal, and you didn't have time to sit there and tuck 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 talk to somebody else, right? You cannot know what audience members are going to be doing in advance. Uh, who knows? They may be responding to questions or taking notes. You don't know what they're doing when they're doing it. The best strategy you can have would be to ignore behaviors if they're not affecting your speech. You should address any behavior that affects your speech. And the whole point of going through all these different things is so that you can confidently recover, right? The scenery can affect the way that you address the different things that are going on. There could be someone in the audience who displays some sort of difficult behavior. Any one of these things that we address would be a difficult behavior, but it may not be a disruption for a person to be on their phone in, say, a keynote or an informative speech, because you're when you're giving those type of speeches, you're just giving information, right? So it's a one-way line of communication. However, if that same person was doing it, it might be a major disruption if you were trying to lead a discussion with the group and you're actually asking audience members to give you feedback while you're talking. And then if they're sitting there going tuck 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 on that phone, then it becomes a problem, right? Use your discretion when you are when you are appealing to some sort of audience member. If the person's behavior is not really a distraction to you or a distraction to anyone else in the audience, then just continue focusing on your presentation. If it's not interrupting you and it doesn't affect you, keep focusing on your presentation. When you do need to address an audience behavior, you just had we just went through a whole list of different things that you could be doing, right? So have a solid strategy that you have in your head that will help you engage the different types of distractions that are going on, and this will minimize the disruption to your speech. So if someone keeps asking questions, you say, just tell, okay, hold all your questions to the end, and we'll either do them in a question and answer session, or we'll talk about it after the meeting, and then move on with your discussion. Just be able to recover and move on. So it would help if you learned at least one or two of the different techniques that we talked about for each of the different categories. That way you can use them interchangeably and make use of them whenever you need. The most important part is to keep it professional. Don't don't get negative. Don't get violent. Don't get huffy or puffy, because anytime that you do any of that stuff, it takes away from your message. It takes away from the speech. It takes away from the effectiveness of what you're trying to do. So keep it professional and use the strategies in order to sidetrack them. So now the big question comes: how does all this happen outside of Toastmasters? What can I do? Well, just think about this for a minute, right? Just really think about it. We're in a Toastmasters meeting. You're in a meeting at work. In a Toastmasters meeting, you handle it through A. And at work, you should handle it through A. If it works at Toastmasters, it works at work. It works exactly the way it's planned to work. Like I mentioned before, these things have been going on for decades and decades and decades. They were going on when you were in school. I saw a couple of you shake your head yes when we talked about how the teacher would just stop and look directly at the student. Right? The same thing applies here. Right? The techniques have been there. They've been used for decades. Use them no matter where you are, even if it's outside of Toastmasters. How many times have you been in a meeting where the speaker gets interrupted and the conversation gets sidetracked and goes all the way off on the left-hand side? Were you the speaker? And if you were, did you wish you knew those techniques that you now know? Were you in the audience getting as frustrated as that speaker? Could you, as an audience member, knowing the techniques you now know, get back on track so the speaker can continue? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we went over all these objectives. The important part was to remember that you want to keep it professional. You want your audience to have a certain reaction, whether it's a laugh, cry, interaction, whatever it is, you want your message to be reached, and you have to deal with interactions and how to handle those type of people. And we went through those. So I am going to stop sharing. I'm going to open up for questions and answers, and I'm going to drop my slides into the chat room for you. So you have a copy. You can go over these at your leisure. So let me stop sharing right now. Okay, stop share. And we open it for questions. Who's got a question?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So, I
You,
know
you started off with so. I hope the counter is counting.
we don't have a counter right now. Okay, we said that in Toastmasters is a safe environment that we can practice our speeches and probably use it like for work or for your boss.
Yep.
You know, if you're asking for a raise or something like that.
Yep.
Or some kind of project topic that you're working on. Well, sometimes the Toastmaster members don't really know the subject. So, you know, to me, it's like there'll be less questions, you know, about the subject. So if you present it to your group and they know the subject and they would be asking you lots of questions and you kind of don't really know how to answer all the questions, will you say I'll get back to you when I look into this or what?
Well, you won't say when you look into it, but you say that we're running out of time and I'll get back to you. And you take note of what their question is. And then you follow up and you get back with them. It's important that you actually do what you say you're going to do.
Right.
And if you're presenting to your group, especially at work, so I've seen this happen all the time. A speaker will get up there, they'll start doing a presentation, someone will ask a question, then someone else will ask a question, and then all of a sudden that presentation is derailed. It's often left field somewhere. The presenter needs to say, okay, hold on, hold those questions. We'll have a question and answer period later on. You're talking about stuff that we're going to get to later on inside the presentation. Let me move on with my presentation and then continue. So that's the technique that you would have to be learning. So if you're having those problems at work and people are interrupting you, then just use that technique and put it off until the question and answer period. And then leave time for that question and answer period, right? So it's like here we expect in this meeting that we're going to have question and answers, and we want to leave at least 30 minutes time, 25, 30 minutes to where we can have questions and answers. So we planned the meeting or we planned the presentation to be 30 minutes long, 30, 35, 40 minutes long. And then the rest of the time is for questions and answers. And if people are asking questions or interrupting during the presentation, you just say, can you hold that into the question and answer period? And then we go on.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, Lily. Yes.
Sometimes when we present it, no one responds. We ask the questions, do you have any doubts? No one responds. So how do we know that they understood that what we are saying? Ask them the questions from what we said so that they come into the track, or like, how do we handle this? I see most of this in the meetings. So people, if we ask them, we have any questions, we present them and we ask them any questions, they don't respond. We think yeah, so they don't have, they understood everything. It doesn't
Well-
mean they got it.
Well, it usually comes down to, like, right now we have a question and answer period. And
Right.
if none of you said or asked any questions, I would sit there and say, oh my God, so you're all experts now. You can handle everything without any issues whatsoever. Oh, wow, I'm glad I did it. I did such a great job. Go me, go me, go me. Explain it to me. And then see what happens. Because clearly they're not going to be able to explain it to you if they have questions.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
And the moment you say, Lalitha, explain such and such to me. And if you can't, then you're going to have to ask the question.
Right.
So I have a question.
Good.
The question is, so when I present a meeting to another person, sometimes the one person, an arguer type presenter, or arguer type listener, he will start asking questions, and then he takes the conversation to a different level. That means he takes that, and then he won't allow me to complete the topic. And
Is-
then,
Is this a one-on-one conversation?
no, in a group meeting,
Okay.
in a meeting, yeah, he intentionally does it. But how to handle this person?
Tell them to hold on to their questions until the end of the meeting.
Then say, he will say, no, I don't want to hold on the question till the end. I want that now that to be handled.
I don't have enough time to answer your question right now. Hold on to them till the end of the meeting.
Ah. Yeah, it happened to me. Sorry, it happened to me like that. Then he, what he is doing is he's going to complain to the project manager, saying that he's not allowing me to speak, and he is not giving me attention, and he's supposed to listen to me, and he's not.
That's
not
okay.
listening.
I don't care. Let him complain to the manager. Doesn't matter. He can complain to the manager all he wants. When the manager comes to you, you just tell him, well, he was interrupting my speech. I asked him to hold on to it until the end of the speech so I can answer them at the end. He refused.
Okay.
Jim, if in even one-to-one, how do we handle it?
Well, one-to-one, you have a lot more leeway. Right? You can choose whether or not you want to respond right there on the spot, because it's one-to-one. There's you don't have a group. You're not holding anyone else's attention other than the person in front of you.
Right.
So how you respond between you and that person is totally different than it is if you're with a group. But the techniques would be the same. If you don't want to answer them right now and you just want to wait until the end, you just ask them, hold on to your questions until I finish, because somewhere in my conversation, I may already give you your answer and you don't know that until I get there.
Jim, I kind of opened that file that you sent us.
Why not?
I don't know. It's asking me which software to choose. I said Acrobat Reader.
No, PowerPoint.
Oh, it's PowerPoint.
Yes. Any other questions? This is your time to ask. Or forever hold your peace. All right, if there are no other questions, I am going to stop sharing. Let's see, where's this? Oh, I stopped sharing. I'm going to stop recording.
You
There are
did.
no,
Yeah, stop it. Okay.